right, thanks very much for having me. I love Instagram, it's the hyper thing is really cool. I've been using it quite a bit, so it was nice to listen to the presentation. So my job today is to talk to you about the future. I lived in the US for 17 years. I'm originally from Germany. I live in Switzerland now. So if I say things that are painful, that's my German part. And if I say things that are interesting or awesome, that's my American part. Many of you may have never actually seen a futurist before, a live futurist. There's people like Alvin Toffler, of course. You may know Ray Kurzweil. What I do is really quite different. I look at the immediate future. So basically the idea of saying what happens in a very short time, in the next 5 years. And there's a great saying in China that says, if you want to know about the future, ask your children. And it's so true because in many ways there's things that we already know that we're not looking at. That's kind of my job, is to go backwards from the future. So I'm not into predictions, I'm into foresights. And all of you have foresights, just a question of looking at them. So one foresight, for example, as compared to predicting the future is, I don't talk about flying cars, but I will talk to you about the self-driving car. Right? So much more realistic and short-time things. So today's topic is really about what is happening with marketing and advertising in a digital native society. There have, in fact, been people saying that in a connected world, in a networked society, we don't need advertising. Right? Because the assumption is that whatever we find together is the advertising in itself. Right? So the content is actually the ad. Of course, we're not quite there yet. We're actually quite far away from this. But the question is, how can we transform, like this car transforms, the advertising marketing business into a new industry? Because in 5 years, we're going to have 5 billion people connected to high-speed mobile networks. We're going to have people looking for information by speaking to the computer, by using computer brain interfaces, by having automatic language translation. This is stuff that sounds like science fiction, right? Just get an app. There's a great app. It's called, what is it called? It's a translation app. Say Hi, it's called, right? If you use Say Hi, you can speak into it. It costs $2, right? You can speak into it, and then it will translate into 20 languages in real time. That's kind of science fiction. It's a Matrix, Minority Report stuff, right? So we're looking at transformation at a really pretty fast pace. And there's one thing you shouldn't do. I worked in the music industry for a long time. I wrote a bunch of books about music, and most of that was a waste of time. Basically, whatever you do, if you don't do what the music business does, you're pretty well off. The music business essentially faced transformation in 1998 with Napster. And of course, the response was to say, you know what, that may be true, but we won't like it. We're not participating. And then you see what happens on this curve on their revenue streams. There's 71% demise of digital music. Now we have Spotify, right? If every person that is connected to the internet would have a Spotify app as part of their mobile phone subscription, the revenues would be twice as big as they were 10 years ago. Right? But of course, this is the question of how we get from A to B. But, needless to say, you can't fax a cat. Right? So if that's your response to the changes, actually it's funny that in many ways, marketing and advertising agencies are kind of like record labels, right? If you haven't noticed. Because brands can go direct, but in theory, of course, we still need labels, publishers, middlemen, but how? You've observed, I've written 5 books. I don't use a publisher anymore, but I would if there was scale to it. The question is, what do they really offer? The question for your clients would be, what do you offer that makes it worth paying you all that money that they used to pay you? So that is a serious question about not trying to fax the cat. The same goes for newspapers, for example. Right? Rather than the New York Times, which is trying to force me to pay, in this case, I'd be happy to pay, but it's 1 million subscribers for the biggest newspaper in the world. There's hardly a success for what they call the paywall. Right? That's actually pretty bad for the biggest newspaper in the world. Right? And it's not growing. So their approach to the paywall has failed. Right? And they have admitted as much just a couple of weeks ago. Right? A 5-year process. So Netflix is the opposite, which is a huge debate about Netflix in Australia, I just noticed, right? About when it's coming and all the people using it with VPNs, which is a great way to watch Netflix. We have to think about pay will, not paywall. Right? The question that we have to ask ourselves is how will people pay for sure rather than how can we make them pay. Because you can almost never make somebody pay on the internet, in the digital world. You can make me pay for the computer or the car, right? Because you cannot yet make a digital copy of that. But for media, content, information, data, right, it's about pay will, not paywall. Because now we're moving into what has been called in many ways an exponential society. It's kind of hard to understand because people aren't exponential. You know, we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you know, we don't live faster or move faster or have more hours in our day just because we have mobile phones. We can have 150 people in our tribe. That's kind of the social amplification that we can have. We cannot have 15,000. Right? We're linear. But technology is exponential. So we're seeing the change from the past few years has come up with stuff that you would not have believed just 5 years ago. This year in November, Microsoft will roll out live translation in Skype. Right? So you can talk in Chinese and listen to it in like 40 languages in real time. Right? That's exponential technology. So if you're thinking about your business, don't think linear. This will be deadly. The advertising business and the marketing business and the branding business is subject to this exponential scale of technology. So basically, most of that is about data, as we've heard many times today. Because basically data and artificial intelligence, which I'll talk more about shortly, and the Internet of Things and automation will revolutionize how we do things. Sometimes in bad ways, sometimes in good ways, but you know, this is kind of what we get with technology. We're now at the takeoff point. We're at 4, and the next step isn't 5, it's 8. And after that is 16 and so on. This is about every 16 to 18 months. So Hemingway has a great quote on this. He says, how does a person go broke? Gradually, then suddenly. So all the stuff we're talking about today, we've heard that 1996, the beginning of the internet. I was part of that, you know, the evangelism of how the web will change everything. And we talked about Spotify type music like water, right? 1999. How long did it take? 15 years. But if you assume that today we're at the beginning of this, we're not. We're actually shortly before that takeoff point. It's gradually, then suddenly, we're beyond the gradually now. We're approaching the suddenly point. And this will happen with advertising, it will happen with media. For example, if you see what happens with all kinds of media online, it's a total margin reduction. I mean, on Kindle, you can now get a flat rate for books. I think it's about 2 million books. So I used to buy a printed book for, what, $20? Then I buy a Kindle book for $12. Now I buy a subscription for $10. Right? What is the next thing? I get paid to read. Right? I don't know, something like that. But it's ultra efficient. What does it do to the writer? Well, the writer hopes to get a larger audience. Right? Netflix, $30 DVD. Netflix, $10. Right? No wonder the studios don't want this. Hyper efficiency. And you're subject to the same rules of the market. Technology brings hyper efficiency. That's the bad news, right? The German news. It reduces traditional margins. And there's nothing we can do about that. We can't, we can sort of try to delay it, like the record labels did, not be part of it, sue people for non-compliance, right? But in the end, Netflix just sent me an email a couple of weeks ago. They're hiking the price, but they let me continue with what I started paying through a VPN, by the way, 2 years ago. I pay more for the VPN than I pay for Netflix. I mean, isn't that ironic? I pay more for the how-to than for the content. Right? I mean, whoever thought of that strategy as far as the content owners is concerned, right, should be going cleaning some toilet somewhere rather than think about the future of their company. Right? Bad idea. So here's 2 curves to remember, to dream about tonight. The first curve, life and technology is changing exponentially. Who would have thought of self-driving cars? 5 years ago, I did a seminar for Volkswagen, and I told them that we're looking towards electric cars, shared cars, and the biggest trend in cars is not to have one, really. Not in Australia, I don't think, but in general. Right? So this is exponential. Right? We have to start thinking exponentially. The second one is the valley of death. And that means as technology is changing your business, The future is actually pretty bright because you will have 5 billion people connected to media, to mobile tablets, to high streaming fast networks, right? To direct marketing options, to data streams. That sounds like a nirvana, right? And in fact, it is. In 5 years, we have that. But today, we don't. Right? Today, we're stuck with that old stuff. Like in Australia, you can't even connect in many places, right? When you go outside of the big cities. You don't have I think 91% of Australians aren't actually covered in 3G. Right? Well, if you don't live in the cities, I suppose. So there is the gap, the valley of death. So if you're an agency, for example, you're going to see this valley of death